there, everybody. I wanted to give a little bit of a presentation about how to grade emergent ELs equitably. Danielle and I came up with this yesterday. I know that a lot of teachers have been struggling to figure out who their ELs are, and more specifically, who their emergent ELs are. So, emergent ELs, when we talk about this, we're talking about those students who are in my ESL 1 and 2 class. So from the email that I gave yesterday, ESL 1 and 2 means that those students are in their first year, maybe first few months in the United States, and it's the first time for them in their lives learning the English language. Really, newcomer students, emergent students, it could be from the first month to the first 4 years of being in the United States. That's how they're classified. Now, those students do get a different grading scale. So first, I want to talk about some of the work that you guys have noticed from your emergent students. So here we have an example that a history teacher was nice enough to give us of an emergent student who took notes about the Holocaust. So sometimes when you receive work from an emergent student, you may get a whole gamut of things. You may get some responses that were translated from Google Translate, which is just fine. You may get some answers that are just purely in Spanish, if that's their first language, or it could be French if that's their first language. And often they did not understand the prompt. So, for example, the question 3, I think, hold on. It was, question 3. So it says, name 2 anti-Jewish practices in history that are not the Holocaust. So this emergent student wrote her answer in Spanish, which is just fine. But when you translate her response, she wrote, they are the ones who are ancient Jesus in the history of man. So it doesn't really make sense based on the prompt. So we want to talk about a little bit, what do you do when you get this kind of responses from your emergent students? How do you grade them? Because it's not how you would grade your other students. Here's another example. So this is from an ed puzzle. So this emergent student was told, okay, give one way science and experiments are changing your life today. And her response, since she did not have subtitles in Spanish to understand what she was being asked in the video, her response was with as much English as she knew, which was, she said, I learned this today. So while this might look like, the student didn't put in a lot of effort and it's obviously a wrong answer, emergent students should be graded based on completion for this kind of response, since the student was using as much English knowledge as she understood in order to answer this question, especially since the video was not modified to include her first language. Now, a lot of the students, the emergent students right now, and this really, it's only that list that I gave out, those 21 students are labeled as emergent. Other EL students that you have on your class lists, it's a different situation for them. So if you would like to talk to me about them, you can. Right now, I'm just giving a presentation about those emergent kids. So let's take, for example, we have emergent student A. He arrived in the United States last school year. This is a student that we actually have at CHS right now. He's reading in English at a first grade reading level. This student is highly motivated, committed to his work. In his personal life, he's actually a primary breadwinner for his household. Now, if you look at his grades on the right here, he is carrying 4 Fs. Now, the Fs that he carries are really dense with something called CALPS, which is Cognitive Academic Language Proficiency Skills. So that means all of that academic vocabulary with directions like analyze or interpret, but also those terms like the French Revolution or scientific method. So usually those kinds of academic terms of vocabulary are not mastered by someone learning the English language for the first time until after 5 to 10 years in the United States. And keep in mind that this child, he is within his first year in the United States. So his 28% to his 47% Fs are reflecting a daily effort of trying to log on and accomplish assignments. Now, for a typical American student who would be taking these classes in their first language, his Cs would most likely be As and his Fs would most likely be maybe Cs or Bs. Okay. So, emergent students, we do have a different grading scale for them that is provided by our district. And so this is what you would be looking at for a student who is either pre-functional in English language, they don't know anything yet, or at the beginning, okay? With, it says less than 3 years of schooling, but I would say less than 4. Now, some of you guys have used this rubric in the past in order to grade these students. The sections are effort, meaningful participation, initiative, attendance, and behavior and compliance. Now, due to the unique nature of COVID-19 right now, I would suggest that we omit the attendance and behavior compliance component of this rubric when you're assessing an emergent student, since we're not in the physical classroom and it's too difficult to actually measure those things right now. So I'm going to go into a little bit about how you analyze that rubric. So if those first 3 sections that I mentioned, that student had been putting in all of forth 100% effort in those areas, you would give them a 5, okay? Or if you figured out that they seem like they've been really attempting. So I would say somewhere between the 3 and 5 area would be appropriate, okay? And this can be used to look at individual assignment grades and also overall grades for the class. Now, what you will do is basically take an average of the 3 sections, effort, meaningful participation, and initiative, in order to calculate a cumulative grade for the quarter. Now, if you have any questions about how to implement this rubric and chart, I can help you guys to navigate that as it relates to individual assignments or at this point, the overall quarter grade. So interpreting this rubric right now in COVID-19 is really important because you're going to have to ask yourself some different questions since you're not physically seeing our emergent students every day. So, for example, in the effort section, you could be asking yourself, did the student attempt to accomplish 5 or more assignments in your class this quarter? Now, 5 assignments does not seem to, to the average American student who's taking classes in their first language, 5 assignments seems like, okay, they're not trying at all. They're just putting in their minimum. Now, but for our emergent kids, when one assignment may take them 3 hours, when going back and forth in translation and also asking Ms. Kirkerai for help about how to understand it, those 5 assignments actually measure out to a lot of work. So when you're evaluating effort and whether or not to give that child, that 3 to 5 range, so that B to A range, try to think about how much have you been seeing that they've been producing, as far as maybe 5 or more assignments. Did they make an effort on your assignments but did not understand what you were looking for? Now, this is very common with ELs, and if you are thinking that maybe they should have understood your directions based on the accommodations you made or the modifications you made, you can always check in with Danielle or I about if that material was accessible to that child. Now, the section on meaningful participation, I know that this is very hard to gauge right now during this online learning environment, but you can ask yourself, did the student attempt completion on assignments? So maybe they didn't turn it in all the way, but they tried. They did like 4 questions or 5 questions out of the 10. They opened it up. They didn't turn it in officially, but they tried. They attempted it. And then the section on initiative. So this could be a complementary thing because the students who are emergent, I have almost all of them in my EL cohort this year in person. And then Danielle has a few in her room as well. There are a few students that are online, though, that are emergent right now. So you can ask yourself, has the student worked with Danielle or I for support? Have they reached out to you with questions, either on Google Classroom or on email? Now, if they haven't, that doesn't necessarily mean they don't care about their grades. It means that they don't know how to talk to you as a teacher, what medium to use, and they're also nervous about using the language barrier. So again, for this rubric this year, when you're looking at quarter one grades, omit the attendance portion and omit the behavior and compliance portion, since you're not able to assess it accurately this year when they're not in person. Now, I have this graphic over here on the side about equity for ELs during a coronavirus pandemic, because obviously right now those students are not receiving the in-person modeling and physical gestures and classroom activities and group activities that they would need to really understand material and to also to feel safe during this time. So what you should be focusing on going into second quarter is finding a way that works for you and for your EL emergent student to communicate. And I'm going to give you guys some tips on how to do that. All right, so here's an example of some workload from an emergent student. So if you look to the left, I've circled some Fs that the student has received. So the Fs on these assignments, when you're going through the grade book for quarter one, reconsider the assignment and also think about, could you grade this based on their effort, especially if it was not modified with either a language translation or simplification of directions, or if it wasn't consulted with Danielle or I first. So also old assignments that are missing in this learning environment right now, it would probably be best that they're excluded so that they can move on to more current topics and not keep going back and doing old missing assignments and getting further and further behind. Now, assignments that are not accessible or cannot be modified should be exempted. I want to make a note that it is okay for an emergent ESL student to have significantly less work than other students, since the work that they do get often takes them 3 times as long as the average student. Now, as we're going into quarter two, there's some really helpful information that I have for you guys. So on Google Classroom, there is a way to assign less work to just specific students, to individual students. And that's a way that you could be giving those modified assessments to emergent ELs so that their Google Classroom feed is not clogged up with a bunch of material that they can't really access linguistically. So right here, if you click on this red link, it will link you to a very short YouTube video. It's just 1 minute and 30 seconds or so about how you can just assign a few students a certain assignment on Google Classroom. Now, I have worked with some teachers this quarter, and they've done this. And if you email me, I can give you their names for suggestions if the video does not make sense, or I personally can come down and to help you at school with doing this. So this way you could actually set up all the emergent students in your class. You could just give them a group of assignments and just have them do that. Now, second thing, as we're going into quarter two, especially right now during our coronavirus pandemic teaching environment, less is more. So think about what kind of qualitative work would you like to see from your students, um, and just have them do like those things. They don't necessarily need to have, 5 different parts of an assignment each day, in order to show you that they've learned and that they are understanding the material. Now, a special note about communication, since I said that communication is so important to helping emergent ELs. I actually set up every student at Coleraine High School, every ESL student, with Google Chat as a means of communication. And for these students, really, this is their best medium. They respond so quickly to me on this medium. And also, there's a way for you to make a Google Chat group with just those students that are emergent in your class, and you could be giving them, asking them questions, asking them if they need support. And also, you could use Google Translate, and maybe if all of those students are Hispanic, you could be sending that message in Spanish to those students. And then I have this quote over here. So grading for ELLs, as for all students, it's not formulaic, it shouldn't be rigid, and it shouldn't be a mystery or a surprise. So I'm trying to give you guys some support about how to navigate this kind of grading scale. So some things to keep in mind. What your aim is equity for emergent ELs and not equality. So you can ask yourself these reflective questions about how accessible an assignment is for a student. So is it translatable? So is that web page actually able to be translated into their primary language? If not, then that's not an accessible assignment for that student. Um, if English was not your first language, would you be able to understand those directions? Is the vocabulary too advanced? And if you're not sure about that, you can ask Danielle or I. Is the assignment assessing knowledge gained from a resource that is not ESL friendly? So was the Lexile level way too high for that student to be able to access? Were there examples and sentence stems? So the best thing to do with these students is to model, give examples. When in doubt, give a model, a picture, and an example. And a special note, if an emergent student skips an assignment, it is probably because they did not understand what to do, not because they're just being lazy. When in doubt, assume that your emergent student in your class is lost and does not know where to start. And also, if the student's answers to questions are not exactly what you were looking for with your directive, it's probably because they did not understand the question, or if they put it into translator, it didn't translate very well through Google Translate. So that's why they produced a very different response. And again, modifications that work for ELs work for everybody. So when you add modeling, when you add those examples, images, it goes to support everybody, not just emergent ELs. So as you are going through the rubric, the alternative grading rubric for emergent ELs in your class this year, let me know if you need support on figuring out the numeric part of it and the effort part. Danielle and I are with these kids every day. And if they're online, we have been supporting them online through video chat every week. So if you're worried about the efforts and the understanding of the material, you can just talk to us to get that information. As always, we're here to support you guys, and I'll see ya.